After a 14-hour ER night shift, my hands still reeking of sanitizer, I opened my banking app to check my father's heart surgery fund. The balance read $0. 3 minutes later, my sister texted that her luxury healing trip was a brand opportunity and I should pick up extra shifts. I did not scream, I just smiled. My family had no idea they had just made the most expensive mistake of their lives. I am Nora Chavez. I am 34 years old. Respiratory therapist. My life is measured in breaths, specifically the ones people cannot take on their own. I had just walked out of the sliding glass doors of Blackstone Harbor Medical Center. 14 hours. That was the length of my night shift in the emergency room. 14 hours of alarms piercing my eardrums, of chest compressions cracking ribs beneath my palms, of the sharp, chemical stench of bleach and iodine baked into my skin. My legs felt like lead weights dragging across the linoleum. My throat was sandpaper. Every muscle fiber vibrated with an exhausted tension that only night shift medical workers truly understand. I climbed into my 10-year-old sedan. The vinyl seat was freezing against my back. Before putting the key in the ignition, I grabbed my phone. My hands still reeked of harsh antibacterial soap. Early next week, my father, Tomas Chavez, was scheduled for a life-saving heart valve replacement. The hospital required a substantial prepayment to secure the operating room and the surgical team. I opened my banking app. The screen glowed, harsh and bright in the dark cabin of my car. I navigated to the Joint Surgery Fund account. The loading icon spun for a fraction of a second. Then, the balance appeared. I blinked. My vision was blurry from fatigue. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The balance was $0. There were no cents, just a flat, mocking void. My brain, conditioned to respond instantly to sudden drops in heart rates and oxygen levels, momentarily froze. I hit refresh. The circle spun again. The result was the exact same. $0. I tapped into the transaction history. The money had not vanished into thin air. It had been systematically drained. A massive sum, entirely gone. The timeline of betrayal showed it happened yesterday afternoon, right around the time I was pushing a crash cart into Trauma Bay 3. The total amount had been sliced into 5 distinct, smaller transfers. Someone was intentionally trying to avoid triggering the bank automated fraud alerts for large movements of cash. This was not a panicked mistake. It was a calculated extraction. A vibration hummed against my palm. A text message dropped down from the top banner of my phone screen. It was from Bianca Chavez, my older sister. Boarding soon. This luxury healing trip to Bali is exactly what my brand needs right now. Do not overreact about the account. I will explain everything when I get back. Pick up an extra shift if you are stressed. The words sat there on the glass, condescending, dripping with an entitlement so profound it made my stomach turn. I did not text her back. I tapped my father's contact and hit call. The phone rang. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. I hung up. I called again. Voicemail. He was avoiding me. A minute later, another text arrived. This one was from Elena, my mother. Come to the house. We will talk. Do not put pressure on your father. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. I put the car in drive. The engine rattled. I pulled out of the hospital parking lot and onto the empty streets of Blackstone Harbor. The sky was a bruised, pre-dawn purple. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the dashboard. I drove in complete silence. I was in shock. Yes, a cold numbness was spreading from my chest outward, freezing my lungs. But beneath that icy shock, I was terrifyingly lucid. My mind began to catalog the past 3 years. I remembered every single holiday I volunteered to work because the penalty pay was double. I remembered every vacation I canceled, every invitation I declined. I remembered the chronic back pain from moving incapacitated patients, the skipped meals, the utter isolation of working nights while the rest of the world slept, all of it. Every drop of sweat and missed hour of sleep had been converted into that fund. It was the literal price of my father living to see another year. Now, it was funding a beachfront villa, The phone sat quietly next to me. A normal person, a weaker person, would have pulled over right then. They would have dialed emergency services. They would have reported elder financial exploitation and grand larceny. My thumb twitched toward the screen. But I stopped myself. I did not call the police. It was not out of loyalty to my blood, and it certainly was not out of weakness. It was pure survival instinct. I knew the ecosystem of my family. I knew exactly how the poison flowed through our house. If I made one wrong move, if I brought the authorities in blindly without an airtight trap, they would close ranks. Bianca would cry on command. Elena would fiercely defend her golden child, spinning a narrative about a misunderstood loan or a temporary business investment that was meant to double their money. They would bully my father into corroborating their story. He was weak, his heart literally failing him, and he would cave to the loudest voice in the room. They would erase the digital footprints. I would be painted as the hysterical, jealous younger sister making baseless accusations. I could not just react. I had to be perfectly ruthless. I turned onto their street. The manicured lawns and silent driveways of their affluent suburban neighborhood stood in stark contrast to the chaos I had just left. I pulled into their driveway. The porch light was on, a beacon guiding me to the front door. I turned off the engine. My clogs crunched heavily on the gravel walkway. I pushed the heavy oak front door open. It was unlocked. The air inside the house hit me like a physical wall. It was thick with the suffocating scent of expensive, burning sandalwood. It was the signature scent of the boutique candles Bianca hawked to her followers on her wellness channel. I walked slowly into the living room. In the center of the plush, cream-colored rug, a massive, hard-shell designer suitcase lay open. Expensive resort wear and silk wraps spilled over the edges. On the glass coffee table, resting next to a scattered deck of daily affirmation cards, was her passport. It sat right in the middle of the glass, a direct, calculated slap in the face. Footsteps padded softly on the hardwood floor behind me. I turned. Bianca strolled into the room. She was draped in a flowing ivory silk robe. Her skin was perfectly exfoliated and glowing, meticulously prepped for a 20-hour first-class flight. She held a crystal glass filled with expensive red wine. She stopped near the edge of the sofa. She took a slow, deliberate sip from the glass. Her perfectly arched eyebrows lowered slightly as her eyes tracked down my bleach-stained scrubs, lingered on my scuffed, blood-flecked work shoes, and traveled slowly back up to my exhausted face. She let out a soft, amused breath, entirely unfazed by the destruction she had just caused. "Dad agreed," she said, her voice smooth and utterly devoid of guilt. "You are the only one making a fuss." I walked right past the glass of wine and my sister. I headed straight for the kitchen. The pale fluorescent light above the island illuminated my parents. My father, Tomas, sat hunched over the marble countertop, staring intensely at a cold mug of decaf coffee. He was a man whose physical heart was failing, but his spine had crumbled long before that. My mother, Elena, stood behind him, her hands resting protectively on his shoulders like a general guarding a compromised asset. I stopped at the edge of the kitchen island. I did not raise my voice. I did not have the energy to scream. I looked directly at my father. "How did she get into the account, Dad?" I asked. My voice was a flat, deadened monotone. "It requires dual authentication. A text message goes to your phone for any transfer over $1,000. Tomas flinched. He refused to meet my eyes. He traced the rim of his mug with a trembling, pale finger. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Finally, he let out a ragged sigh. "I gave her the code, Nora," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. "She came to me yesterday crying. She said she was completely tapped out. She said she only needed to borrow it for a few days to secure a major brand deal. She promised she would put it right back before the hospital billing department called on Monday." Before I could even process the sheer absurdity of his statement, Elena stepped out from behind him. Her jaw was set, her eyes flashing with a familiar, defensive fire. "Do not look at him like that," Elena snapped. "Your sister is under an immense amount of pressure. You do not understand the wellness industry. You do not understand her brand. Her mental health is incredibly fragile right now. She is practically having a nervous breakdown trying to keep up her image. You are safely employed at the hospital. You get a steady paycheck. Bianca relies on perception. If she loses this opportunity, her whole career collapses." I stared at my mother, feeling a cold detachment settle over my brain. It was a practice detachment, the same one I used when a trauma patient came in screaming. Bianca had built an entire online persona as a holistic wellness mentor. She posted daily about mindfulness, financial abundance, and living an authentic life. The reality, which we all knew but were forbidden to discuss, was entirely different. Bianca was drowning in thousands of dollars of credit card debt. Her engagement metrics were tanking. Her last 2 organic sponsorships had quietly dropped her because she could not deliver the promised conversion rates. This luxury retreat in Bali was not a celebration of success. It was a desperate, wildly expensive stage production to fake a lifestyle she could no longer afford. And I was always the beast of burden. For 10 years, I had been the family shock absorber. When my father was laid off 5 years ago, I took over the mortgage payments. When Bianca crashed her car driving home from a party without insurance, I drained my emergency savings to settle with the other drivers so she would not get sued. I was the responsible one, the boring one, the one expected to endure, to work the graveyard shifts, and to fix the crises they created. But this time was different. They did not just steal my overtime. A sharp, physical ache bloomed in the center of my chest. Just 4 days ago, the charge nurse had pulled me into the break room at the end of a grueling shift. The entire emergency department staff was there, the trauma surgeons, the triage nurses, even the overnight janitorial crew. They had handed me a thick, stuffed envelope. It contained over $12,000. They had quietly taken up a collection for months because they knew how hard I was struggling to meet the hospital prepayment deadline. That money was made of crinkled $20 bills from people who scrubbed floors, and generous checks from doctors who had watched me hold the hands of dying patients. It was an act of pure grace. It was sacred. And my sister had just stolen it to pay for a tropical backdrop. The betrayal was so massive, so profoundly violating. It transcended anger. It became crystalline clarity. Bianca sauntered into the kitchen, her silk robe trailing behind her. She leaned against the refrigerator, swirling the expensive wine. "Mom is right," Bianca said, waving her free hand dismissively. "This Bali trip is a healing retreat, but it is also where I am signing an international sponsorship. It is an investment. Nora, stop looking at it like a theft. I am literally going to pay Dad back double the amount by the 2nd week of next month. You are being completely dramatic." She was looking at me like I was a stubborn child throwing a tantrum over a toy. She expected me to explode. She wanted me to yell, to cry, to hurl insults. If I did that, I would become the aggressor. Elena would comfort her. Tomas would retreat into his shell. And the narrative would solidify. Nora is unhinged. Bianca is the victim. So, I did the exact opposite. I took a slow, deep breath. Perfectly mimicking the breathing exercises she peddled online, I let the tension drop from my shoulders. I softened my gaze. I watched the brief flicker of confusion cross Bianca's perfectly contoured face. "You know what?" I said, my voice smooth and surprisingly gentle. "You are right. I am exhausted. I just panicked when I saw the 0. Elena let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief. Tomas finally looked up, offering a weak, grateful smile. "But," I continued, turning my attention entirely to Bianca, "I am actually worried for you now. The bank's fraud algorithm is incredibly strict about sudden, large international wires, especially since you divided the payments up yesterday. If the system flags it as suspicious while you are over the Pacific, they will freeze all your accounts. You could land in Indonesia with no access to any funds. Your hotel, your vendors, everything will bounce." Fear, genuine and sharp, finally pierced through Bianca's smug facade. Her hand tightened around the stem of her wine glass. Wait, are you serious? Will they actually do that? It happens all the time, I lied seamlessly. The banking regulations have gotten much tighter this year. I just do not want your trip ruined by an automated security hold. I paused, letting the anxiety marinate in her mind. I can help you clear it, though we can go to the main branch together right when they open tomorrow morning. We will sit down with a representative, verify the source of the funds in person, and make sure your accounts are greenlit for international travel. Bianca studied my face, searching for a trap, but all she saw was the compliant, helpful younger sister she had manipulated her entire life. She relaxed, a triumphant smirk returning to her glossy lips. She thought she had won. She thought she had broken my spirit yet again. Fine, Bianca sighed, taking another sip of her wine. Pick me up at 8 o'clock sharp, and please, wear something decent. My driver is taking me straight to the airport from the bank. Before picking Bianca up at 8 o'clock that morning, I parked my car 3 blocks away from my parents' house and dialed the 24-hour fraud hotline on the back of my debit card. I did not attempt to hack anything. I did not create a convoluted technological trap. I simply used the exact terminology that compliance officers are legally forbidden to ignore. Suspected elder financial exploitation. The agent on the line, a woman whose voice shifted from bored to sharply attentive the second I spoke those words, gave me precise instructions. She told me to bring the person who initiated the online transfers to a physical branch. The goal was to have them state the purpose of the funds and verify the beneficiary in front of bank personnel, where everything would be legally recorded by high-definition security cameras. An hour later, I was pulling into the parking lot of the downtown Blackstone Harbor Bank branch. Bianca sat in the passenger seat, dressed in a pristine, flowing linen resort ensemble that cost more than my monthly rent. She dragged a white leather designer carry-on behind her, sighing heavily and checking her diamond-encrusted watch every 2 minutes. She complained about the detour for the entire 15-minute drive. Utterly convinced that this was just a minor administrative hurdle standing between her and a first-class lounge, we were escorted past the regular teller lines and into a glass-walled VIP consultation room. The branch manager, a meticulous man named David, sat across from us at a polished mahogany desk. The room was soundproofed, but the small black dome of a security camera was clearly visible in the corner of the ceiling. "Can we please expedite whatever this is?" Bianca demanded, crossing her legs and tapping her manicured nails against the armrest. "My flight to Denpasar boards in exactly 4 hours. I need that international wire cleared immediately. I have a driver waiting outside." David kept his posture perfectly rigid. He pushed a single, crisp document across the desk toward her. "This is standard procedure for large, sudden overseas wires. Miss Chavez, we simply need a signed declaration regarding the source of these funds, and a confirmation that you possess valid authorization from the primary account holder, Tomas Chavez." I sat in the chair next to her, keeping my hands folded in my lap. I kept my voice perfectly neutral, projecting an aura of helpful compliance. "It is just banking bureaucracy. Bianca," I said softly, looking at the document rather than her face, "just sign the explanation so their system unblocks your trip." Bianca snatched the heavy silver pen from the desk holder. She did not even bother to read the fine print. She signed her name with a dramatic, aggressive flourish. "It is a business investment gift from my father," Bianca announced, projecting her voice clearly and looking directly up at the security camera, treating it like a vlog lens. "He is an angel investor for my personal brand. I am the sole authorized beneficiary of these funds. There. Are we done?" I committed those exact words to memory. She had just provided a recorded, legally binding statement that directly contradicted her claim to my father about merely borrowing the money for a few days. David adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He looked down at the ledger displayed on his monitor, his expression unreadable. "Thank you. Now, there is one more matter regarding the 5 separate transfers made yesterday afternoon, which totaled the initial withdrawal amount. Our security system flagged the pattern." Could you clarify why the total sum was broken down into smaller increments, all falling just below the threshold that triggers additional review? Bianca rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, exasperated breath. She looked at David as if he were an incompetent intern wasting her valuable time. "Because your daily limit algorithm is incredibly annoying," she stated proudly. "I split the orders to get them through the system faster, so I could pay my international retreat vendors on time. It is not a crime to be efficient." David stopped typing. His hands slowly pulled away from the keyboard and rested flat on the desk. In the financial sector, what my sister had just arrogantly matched a pattern often associated with structuring. It was a deliberate tactic used to evade anti-money laundering regulations. The silence in the small glass room suddenly grew incredibly heavy, thick enough to choke on. "I see," David said, his voice dropping an octave into a tone of absolute professional finality. "Given that admission on camera, and the nature of the internal alert placed on this account earlier this morning, I am legally obligated to freeze all remaining outbound funds immediately." Bianca froze. The blood drained completely from her bronzed face, leaving her looking sallow and panicked. "Excuse me?" she snapped, her voice cracking. "You absolutely cannot do that. I have a flight. I have an international brand sponsorship waiting for me. My father authorized this money." David shook his head firmly. "We will require Tomas Chavez to appear in person, with dual forms of government identification. We must verify his physical signature, and he must undergo a standard financial coercion screening with our legal department before any hold is lifted. We are also officially opening an internal investigation into the transaction pattern." The realization hit her like a physical blow. There was no automated algorithm glitch. There was no routine check. There was only me. Bianca turned her head slowly. Her eyes were wide with a frantic, feral rage. The carefully crafted mask of the serene wellness mentor shattered completely. "You!" she hissed, her face contorting into something ugly and venomous. She leaped out of her leather chair, knocking it backward. "You set me up, you absolute traitor!" Her voice echoed violently through the glass walls, shattering the quiet, professional hum of the bank lobby. "I am going to ruin you," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger inches from my face. "You are just jealous of me. You have always been jealous." Two uniformed security guards immediately detached themselves from the main entrance doors and began walking briskly toward our glass room. The entire branch, from the tellers counting cash to the mortgage consultants at their cubicles, stopped and stared at the woman having a meltdown in resort wear. I remained perfectly still in my chair. I did not flinch. I just watched her self-destruct. David stood up, trying to ignore the screaming woman who was now being gently but firmly corralled toward the exit by the two guards. He turned his monitor slightly, his expression tight with a new layer of professional concern. "Miss Chavez," David said quietly, projecting his voice just enough to be heard over my sister's screaming obscenities in the lobby. I finally tore my eyes away from the humiliating spectacle. "Yes?" "While reviewing your father's overall profile to initiate the security freeze, I noticed something else," David explained, tapping a manicured finger against his screen. "The freeze applies to the joint surgery account you share with him, but I need to know if you want the fraud alert extended to the secondary account as well." I frowned, a cold spike of confusion piercing through my adrenaline. "What secondary account? My father and I only share the one medical fund. We closed his other accounts years ago when his memory started slipping." David looked at me with genuine, uncomfortable pity. "The custodial account," David said softly. "The one opened under his social security number about 6 months ago. The account that has been receiving the recurring online crowdfunding deposits." I drove straight back to my parents' house, practically dragged my father out of his armchair, and drove him right back to the downtown branch. David was waiting, my father, looking pale and confused, signed the authorization forms with a trembling hand right there at the mahogany desk. David printed the transaction logs for the secondary account. I slid the thick stack of papers toward me. The ledger was a grotesque map of my sister's greed. For the past 6 months, There had been thousands of micro-deposits funneling in from a major online crowdfunding platform. My hands went numb as I read the memo lines attached to the transfers. They were messages of support from strangers. Things like praying for a speedy recovery and stay strong for your dad. I pulled out my phone and searched my sister's public profiles. I scrolled past her recent posts about organic smoothies and mindful yoga flows until I found the pinned video from late last year. My stomach violently revolted. There was Bianca, sitting on the edge of my father's bed. She wore no makeup. Her hair pulled back into a messy bun to simulate distress. She was sobbing directly into the camera lens, begging her followers for urgent financial help to save her father's failing heart. She had monetized his illness. She had turned the man who raised us into a tragic prop for sympathy engagement. But the bank statements told the real story. Not a single cent of that crowd-funded money had ever touched the hospital billing department. The outbound transfer logs showed where the donations actually went. $4,000 to an elite public relations firm. $6,000 paid directly to her premium travel credit card. $2,000 wired to a luxury villa rental agency in Indonesia for her deposit. I looked at my father. He could not meet my gaze. He stared at the polished wood of the desk. "You knew about this," I said. It was not a question. Tomas swallowed hard. "She told me she was setting up a fund to help with the extra costs, the rehabilitation, the medications you were working so hard to pay for." I let her film me. I was just so ashamed. Nora. I was ashamed that my daughter was working night and day to keep me alive while I sat uselessly in a chair. I thought she was helping us. I did not know she kept it all. My mother, who had insisted on riding along, crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "You are being far too controlling. Nora, Bianca did the work. She set up the campaign. She made the videos. She managed the community. She simply took a management fee to keep her own business afloat. Everyone has a right to seize an opportunity to change their life. You cannot expect her to put her entire career on hold just because you chose to be a martyr." A management fee. My mother had just justified stealing money meant for a dying man's heart surgery as a reasonable business expense. The sick, twisted logic of my family finally crystallized in front of me. They were never going to see my side. They were never going to apologize. I stood up, leaving the bank statements on the desk. I realized in that exact moment that I had to split my life into two entirely separate war zones. The first front was my father. I had less than 1 week to replace the stolen surgical prepayment before the hospital canceled his spot in the operating room. I would figure that out. The second front was Bianca. I was no longer going to play the role of the frustrated sibling trying to reason with a narcissist. I was going to dismantle her. I walked out of the bank, leaving my parents to find their own way home. I sat in my car and dialed the number of a professional. Dana Kessler was a senior partner at a local firm who specialized in elder law and civil financial disputes. I had treated her mother in the emergency room 2 years ago, and she had given me her card, telling me to call if I ever needed someone who fought dirty but legally. I spent 45 minutes on the phone with her, outlining every single detail: the drained joint account, the fraudulent crowdfunding, the recorded confession of structuring at the bank, and my father's coerced participation. Dana was silent for a long moment after I finished. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharp and clinical. "You have a very strong case for civil recovery and potentially criminal wire fraud," Dana said. "But you need to brace yourself. Nora, fraudsters, especially family members who have convinced themselves they are entitled to the money, do not just roll over when you cut off their supply. When Bianca realizes she is truly trapped, she will panic. And panicking people do not attack the evidence. They attack the accuser. She will try to spin this as a messy family dispute to muddy the waters. Worse, she will likely aim directly at your livelihood. You need to be ready for collateral damage." I thanked her, officially retained her services, and drove back to my apartment. I was physically exhausted, having been awake for over 30 hours. I forced myself to eat a piece of dry toast and drink a glass of water before collapsing onto my mattress. I needed sleep to figure out how to generate the hospital money by Monday. I woke up abruptly to the harsh, vibrating buzz of my phone against the nightstand. The room was pitch black. The clock read 2 in the morning. It was a text message from the charge nurse at the emergency room. It contained only a screenshot and a single sentence. "Have you seen this yet?" I opened the image. It was a post on the most active community forum in Blackstone Harbor, a digital bulletin board read by tens of thousands of local residents. The post was entirely anonymous, published by a newly created account just an hour ago. The title read in bold, capitalized letters, "Warning. Local emergency room, respiratory therapist, skimming patient funds." The post detailed a highly fabricated story about a clinician at Blackstone Harbor Medical Center who manipulated elderly, vulnerable patients into signing over small amounts of cash while they were disoriented on oxygen. It did not use my name, but it described my exact physical appearance, my exact job title, and the exact shift I worked. It ended with a plea for anyone who had a relative treated in the ER recently to check their bank statements. My sister had officially fired her first shot, and she had aimed it right at my throat. At 9 o'clock the following morning, the fluorescent lights of the Human Resources Department felt like interrogation spotlights. I sat in a windowless office on the 4th floor of Blackstone Harbor Medical Center. Across the polished laminate table sat the director of personnel and the head nurse of the emergency department. Between them lay a single sheet of paper. It was a printed copy of a second anonymous complaint submitted to the hospital compliance portal. This one was not a vague forum rumor about skimming cash. This was a targeted, clinical strike aimed directly at my license to practice medicine. The email alleged that I was actively diverting scheduled narcotics from the automated dispensing cabinets in the trauma bays. It claimed I was overriding the safety protocols during chaotic resuscitation events to pocket vials of powerful painkillers. The penalty for this was not just termination, it was federal prison. The director of personnel folded her hands tightly. She explained that protocol dictated an immediate, mandatory suspension without pay. I had to surrender my badge. I had to hand over my access keys. I was forbidden from stepping foot on clinical grounds while a full forensic audit of the dispensing machines was conducted. It did not matter that my record was spotless. It did not matter that the accusation was entirely baseless. In the medical field, the mere whisper of drug diversion is treated as a confirmed infection. You are quarantined until proven clean. I walked out of the hospital into the blinding mid-morning sun. My chest felt hollowed out. A physical, crushing weight pressed down on my shoulders, making it difficult to draw a full breath. The timing was too perfect, the escalation too precise. The moment I froze her funds, she dismantled my livelihood. But I had no hard proof it was her, and hurling wild accusations at human resources would only make me look erratic and guilty. When I reached my car, I finally looked at my phone. The screen was choked with notifications. Bianca had gone live on her primary social media account an hour earlier. I clicked the archived video. There she sat, framed against the pristine white background of her living room, wearing an oversized, cozy sweater to project vulnerability. Her face was devoid of makeup, and tears were streaming continuously down her cheeks. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She spoke directly to her hundreds of thousands of followers, her voice trembling with manufactured heartbreak. She spun a masterclass of manipulation. She claimed that her jealous, bitter younger sister was trying to sabotage her career out of pure spite. She painted herself as the victim of a toxic family dynamic, a successful female entrepreneur being punished for her ambition by a sibling who was miserable in a grueling, dead-end hospital job. She never mentioned the frozen bank account. She never mentioned the stolen surgery money. She just weaponized her tears to send an army of outraged followers in my direction. The collateral damage was instantaneous. My text messages were a graveyard of blind loyalty to my sister. Aunt Maria messaged me, demanding I stop trying to ruin the family name in public. My cousin Julian told me that family matters need to stay behind closed doors and that I was being cruel to a woman struggling with her mental health. Even old high school friends, people I had not spoken to in over a decade, were sliding into my messages to tell me how disappointed they were in my behavior. I was completely surrounded. isolated in a prison built entirely of lies. I dialed Dana Kessler from the suffocating heat of my parked car. I relayed the hospital suspension and the ongoing digital crucifixion. Dana did not offer sympathy. She offered strategy. "Do not respond," Dana ordered, her voice cutting through my rising panic like a scalpel. "Do not post a status. Do not reply to a single family member. Total radio silence. I want you to go buy a high-capacity external hard drive right now. Screen record every second of that broadcast. Save every hateful message. Capture every timestamp. And archive every comment. If she thinks she is winning the public relations war, let her talk. The more she speaks, the more rope she gives us for a defamation and tortious interference lawsuit." I drove home and shifted into pure survival mode. I spread my father's medical files across the kitchen table. The suspension meant my upcoming shifts were gone, evaporating the holiday pay I was banking on. I grabbed a legal pad and began making calls. I spent 4 agonizing hours navigating automated phone trees and waiting on hold with the billing department, patient advocacy groups, and local cardiac health charities. I pleaded with indifferent representatives, begging for emergency hardship grants, payment extensions, or bridge loans. I offered to put my car up for collateral. Every rejection felt like a door slamming in my father's face. I had to keep that operating room secured, no matter what it cost me. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from an encrypted messaging app. It was from Sarah, the senior charge nurse for my night shifts. She was risking her own job by reaching out. "Nora," her message read, "I saw the formal complaint filed with Human Resources. I am not supposed to tell you this, but the anonymous tipster specifically mentioned the software glitch on the dispensing machine in Bay 4, the one where the screen freezes for 10 seconds after you log a trauma code. Nobody outside of our immediate staff knows about that blind spot." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. 2 months ago, at a Sunday family dinner, I had complained exhaustively about that exact software glitch. I had vented about how dangerous it was during emergencies. Bianca had been sitting right across the table, silently scrolling on her phone, absorbing the operational vulnerabilities of my workplace to use as ammunition later. The room grew dark as the sun set. I sat in silence, the weight of the betrayal settling deep into my bones. Then, a single notification chimed. It was a voice note from Bianca, sent directly to my personal number. I pressed play. The crying, fragile victim from the morning live stream was entirely gone. Her voice was sharp, steady, and dripping with malicious confidence. "Call the bank manager," Bianca's voice echoed through the quiet kitchen. "Tell him you made a mistake, and drop the hold on the accounts. Sign the release forms tomorrow morning. If you do that, the social media posts come down immediately. And who knows? Maybe the hospital human resources department will suddenly realize they made a terrible mistake and lose interest in your little medication problem. Think about it. Little sister, you have 24 hours. She had just handed me the weapon to destroy her. I sat in Dana Kessler's downtown office the next morning. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady note as we built a war room on her massive conference table. We constructed a pristine, irrefutable legal timeline. We documented the exact minute the surgery funds were drained. We logged the recorded confession of structuring at the bank. We pinned down the launch date of the fraudulent crowdfunding campaign and the exact hour the anonymous smear campaign hit the hospital servers. And finally, the crown jewel of our arsenal, the voice note. Dana played it on a loop from her laptop. "Extortion is a felony," she stated flatly, tapping her expensive pen against the legal pad. I refused to engage in risky, clandestine recording games. I was not going to wear a wire or try to trick my family into confessing over the phone. Instead, I sent my sister a single, definitive text message. I wrote that I had retained legal counsel and that all future communication must be in writing or directed to my attorney. I copied Dana's firm email address on the message. It was a concrete wall slamming down, entirely cutting off Bianca's favorite weapon of emotional manipulation. Then, the battlefield shifted in a direction I never anticipated. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but the area code was local. I answered, expecting another angry relative ready to lecture me about family loyalty. Instead, a hushed, nervous voice spoke. It was Preston Hale, Bianca's husband. He was the invisible architect of her brand, the man who held the camera, edited the videos, and managed the back-end analytics of her wellness empire. He told me he needed to meet me immediately, alone, in a public place. We met at a rundown diner on the edge of the city limits, far from the upscale cafes they usually frequented for aesthetic photo shoots. Preston slid into the vinyl booth opposite me. He looked terrible. He was sweating through his expensive polo shirt, and his eyes darted around the empty diner like a hunted animal. "I saw the legal hold notices from the bank," Preston blurted out, keeping his voice painfully low. "She thinks she can charm her way out of this, but she is completely delusional. The crowdfunding platform sends tax forms at the end of the year. If the IRS audits us and sees that money went to a luxury villa instead of a hospital billing department, I go down with her. I am not going to federal prison for a retreat. I did not even want to go on." He slid a sleek silver flash drive across the sticky table. I stared at it. "What is this?" I asked, not touching the metal casing. "Everything," Preston said, swallowing hard. "The raw payment logs from her brand accounts, the invoices from the public relations firm, but mostly, it is the raw video files from the fundraiser." I picked up the drive, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "She did 5 takes, Preston confessed, looking down at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. "Your dad kept messing up his lines. He did not sound sick enough, so she made him slouch more against the pillows. She told him to cough on cue. She even adjusted the ring light to make his skin look paler. I have the unedited footage of her yelling at him to look more pathetic because her engagement metrics were slipping." A visceral wave of nausea washed over me. I looked at the man sitting across from me. Preston was not a hero. He was not a good person suddenly burdened by a heavy conscience. He was a rat abandoning a sinking ship, trying to buy his own immunity by selling out his wife. I felt nothing but contempt for him, but I was not going to reject a weapon handed to me on a silver platter. "I will give this to my lawyer," I said coldly, dropping the drive into my purse. "Do not contact me again unless it is to provide more evidence." I drove the flash drive straight back to Dana. When she reviewed the raw footage, her professional, clinical demeanor cracked into a sharp, predatory smile. This changed the entire landscape of the war. This was no longer just a messy civil dispute over a shared bank account. With Preston's back-end data, Dana immediately expanded our legal strategy. We were now looking at comprehensive fundraising fraud, explicit sponsor deception, and potential wire fraud regarding the payment processing platforms. Simultaneously, Dana filed an emergency petition with the state courts for a temporary financial protection order for Tomas. Given the medical evidence of his failing heart and the clear documentation of funds being diverted under duress, the judge granted it within hours. The order legally mandated a dual verification process for any transaction over $500 tied to my father's Social Security number. Bianca could no longer bully him into signing away his life savings. He was legally quarantined from her influence, while I locked down the financial front. A small fracture of light appeared on the professional front. Sarah, the senior charge nurse, sent me a discreet message from the hospital. The internal audit of the medication dispensing machine was completely clean. Every single vial was accounted for. More importantly, the hospital's compliance team had run a text analysis on the anonymous complaint. They noted that the phrasing was bizarrely specific. The complaint used terms like toxic energy alignment, manifesting negative outcomes, and karmic imbalance to describe a supposed drug theft. It was the exact, distinct vernacular my sister used in her daily wellness posts. The hospital administration was beginning to realize they had been weaponized in a personal vendetta. The pieces were finally falling into place. I was no longer just absorbing blows in the dark. I was systematically dismantling the ground she stood on. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, eating my first real meal in 2 days. I opened my laptop to check my email. At the very top of my inbox was a message forwarded to me by Dana. It was from the legal department of Aura Botanica, the massive international wellness brand that was supposed to sponsor Bianca's trip to Bali. Dana had sent them a very polite, very firm legal preservation notice regarding their upcoming contract with my sister. The response from the brand was brief and devastating. They thanked my attorney for bringing the matter to their attention. They advised that Aura Botanica maintains a strict morality clause in all influencer partnerships. Given the severe inconsistencies regarding the medical narrative used to promote the partnership, they were formally suspending all contractual obligations with Bianca Chavez, effective immediately, pending a full internal review. I read the email 3 times. I closed the laptop. The silence in my apartment was profound, and for the first time in nearly a week, I took a deep, unrestricted breath. I returned to Blackstone Harbor Medical Center not through the employee entrance, but through the sliding glass doors of the emergency bay, trailing behind a paramedic stretcher. It was late Thursday night when my father's chest tightened, and his lungs refused to draw air. Being on the other side of the triage desk was a jarring, helpless experience. I was stripped of my badge, my authority, and my ability to read the monitors without a glaring security guard watching my every move. I was just another terrified family member in the waiting room. When they finally stabilized him in a private room on the cardiac floor, the fluorescent lights cast a sickly gray pallor over his face. The rhythmic beeping of the telemetry machine was the only sound in the room for a long time. I sat in the plastic visitor chair, staring at his frail hands. Tomas slowly turned his head toward me. His eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a profound, crushing shame. He started to cry. It was not a quiet weeping, but a wretched, heaving sob that made the monitors spike. "I signed them, Nora," he choked out, his voice thick with phlegm and regret. "The papers Bianca brought over last week. Your mother. She would not stop shouting at me. She said Bianca's entire future was on the line, that we had to protect the family image. Elena kept saying I was destroying my own daughter by being stubborn. I just wanted the yelling to stop." I closed my eyes, letting the bitterness wash over me. But what he said next shattered the rigid wall of anger I had built around my heart. "I did not just let her take the money," he whispered, his trembling fingers clutching the thin hospital blanket. "I lied to you about the surgery. 2. The original operation was scheduled for 2 months ago." My eyes snapped open. I stared at him, the air leaving my lungs. "What?" "Doctor, Evans told me I needed the valve replaced in early autumn," he confessed, tears spilling onto his pillow. "But I watched you come home from those night shifts. You were falling asleep at the kitchen table. You lost so much weight. You were working yourself into an early grave to save me. I could not bear it. So, I told the clinic I needed to postpone. I told them I was feeling better, just to give you a break. I thought we had more time." A terrible, complex ache bloomed in my chest. My father was not a cold, calculating mastermind. He was a coward. Yes, but he was a terrified father who had made catastrophically stupid choices trying to protect both of his daughters in the most destructive ways possible. I felt a surge of rage mixed with a profound, suffocating grief. He was guilty of weakness, not malice. I stepped out into the sterile hallway to breathe. I called Dana Kessler. I leaned against the cool cinderblock wall and explained the confession. I told her I felt sick, that the black and white lines I had drawn were suddenly bleeding into gray. Dana was silent for a moment. Her voice, when she spoke, was not unkind, but it was unyielding. Empathy is a human reaction, and you are allowed to feel it, but from a legal standpoint, the facts remain absolute. His misguided attempt to spare your schedule does not negate the fact that your sister committed wire fraud and extortion. Emotions can soften. Nora, the legal ledger cannot. Layered truths are still truths. We do not deviate. I ended the call just as the elevator doors chimed at the end of the hall. Elena marched out. She did not look frantic. She looked fiercely annoyed. She strode down the corridor, her heels clicking aggressively against the linoleum. She bypassed the nurse's station without asking a single question about her husband's vitals. She saw me standing outside his door and marched right up to my face. "Can the bank thing be reversed tonight?" Elena demanded, not even glancing through the glass pane at Tomas. "Bianca is having an absolute meltdown. You have completely ruined her life." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. Any residual guilt or hesitation I felt evaporated in that exact second. My father was lying 20 feet away, his heart struggling to beat, and her only concern was the financial inconvenience of her golden child. The moral rot was absolute. I did not argue. I just turned my back on her and walked toward the billing department. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a notification from Bianca's social media. She had posted a new story from the airport departure terminal. She was sitting on her designer luggage, looking utterly defeated, captioning the photo about how toxic family dynamics and bullying had derailed her spiritual journey. The reality, which I knew perfectly well, was that she could not board the plane. The fraud freeze had locked down her payment accounts. She could not access her travel funds or pay the remaining airport fees. She was grounded by her own greed. I spent the next 3 hours in the financial counselor's office. I refused to let my father die because of my sister's vanity. I sat with the hospital advocates, and we tore apart the billing structure. I pieced together a lifeline. We secured a partial grant from a cardiac patient charity fund. I signed a legally binding installment plan, putting my own name on the debt. Finally, I leveraged my clean record, which the internal audit had just cleared, to sign a brutal contract with the hospital staffing agency, committing to an advance payment on mandatory overtime shifts for the next 2 years. It was financial indentured servitude, but it secured the preoperative deposit. By Monday morning, the surgical floor was prepped. I stood by my father's gurney just outside the double doors of the operating theater. The anesthesiologist was adjusting the intravenous lines. Tomas reached out, his weak hand grasping my wrist. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for a forgiveness he did not entirely deserve, but one he desperately needed before going under the knife. "I am sorry, Nora," he breathed. "I am so sorry." I looked down at the man who had traded his own life for a false peace. I squeezed his hand gently, but my voice was completely devoid of illusion. "I saved your surgery, Dad," I said, my words clear and final over the hum of the hospital machinery, "but that does not mean I will save her." While my father lay in the intensive care unit recovering from his operation, the first heavy domino officially tipped over, sending a shockwave through the foundation of my sister's life. Dana Kessler did not waste time sending strongly worded warnings. By Tuesday morning, she dropped the legal hammer. She filed a comprehensive civil suit in the county courthouse, requesting an immediate, sweeping asset freeze on all personal and business accounts connected to Bianca. By Wednesday afternoon, the digital infrastructure of my sister's empire began to collapse under the weight of the injunction. The major payment processing platform that hosted her charity campaign issued a formal demand for an accounting of the funds. Dana had legally submitted the recorded bank lobby footage where Bianca proudly declared the massive cash transfer was a business investment from our father. The payment platform immediately flagged the massive contradiction between a business investment and a dying father charity drive. They permanently locked her entire merchant account for violating their strict terms of service regarding deceptive fundraising, initiating an automatic clawback protocol to refund the donors. Simultaneously, the temporary suspension from the Aura Botanica wellness brand crystallized into a brutal, final termination letter. Their corporate legal team sent a courier directly to Bianca's house. The letter cited a strict morality clause, explicitly condemning her use of a fabricated family health crisis to manipulate consumers and falsely boost engagement metrics. She was stripped of her sponsorships, her income, and her public credibility in a matter of 48 hours. To guarantee he was completely carved out of the incoming civil and potential criminal liability, Preston Hale delivered the final nail for the fraud case. He did not just give us the raw video files. He handed over the raw digital metadata. The embedded timestamps proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that Bianca had staged and filmed 3 separate emotional-to-crying update videos begging for emergency cash a full 10 days after the initial donation payouts had already cleared into her personal checking account. It was not a chaotic mistake. It was premeditated, chronological fraud. But the most staggering revelation came on Thursday morning, proving just how deeply the rot ran in my family. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria when Dana called with a tone of grim disbelief. While I was risking my physical health and signing away my future paychecks to secure my father a spot in the operating room, my mother had been busy executing her own catastrophic financial maneuver. When the initial bank freeze hit my sister's accounts, causing her Indonesian resort vendors to threaten international lawsuits for breach of contract, Elena panicked. Without telling my father, who was heavily medicated and preparing for major surgery, my mother forged ahead to protect her golden child. She signed a consent form to open a massive home equity line of credit against our family house. She drained 75% of the available equity in a single afternoon and wired it to an offshore holding account to cover my sister's immediate debts. Now, with the cascading fraud investigations triggering default clauses across all their shared financial profiles, the mortgage lender was preparing to initiate pre-foreclosure proceedings. My mother had literally mortgaged the roof over her own head to fund a scam. When the reality of the impending foreclosure hit, the toxic, codependent loyalty between my mother and sister instantly evaporated. Bianca did not thank Elena for the ultimate sacrifice. Instead, she viciously turned on both of our parents. In a chaotic, screaming phone call that Elena tearfully forwarded to my voicemail, Bianca blamed our mother for not securing a larger line of credit. She blamed our father for having a weak heart that ruined her carefully curated brand aesthetic. She threw them entirely to the wolves, proving once and for all that she possessed zero loyalty to anyone but herself. Friday brought the only piece of clean air I had breathed in weeks. I was summoned back to the Human Resources Department at Blackstone Harbor Medical Center. The Director of Personnel slid a formal letter of reinstatement across the laminate table. The internal audit of the trauma bay automated dispensing cabinets was flawless. Every single milligram of medication was perfectly accounted for. But the hospital compliance officer went a step further. Working with the Hospital Information Technology Department, they traced the digital footprint of the anonymous complaint submitted to the ethics portal. The Internet Protocol address did not originate from a random public network or a burner phone. It traced directly back to the unique hardware identifier of a laptop that was routinely used to log into the administrative backend of my sister's primary social media website. The hospital not only reinstated me with full back pay for the missed shifts, but they also offered to hand their cybersecurity findings directly over to the local police department. I walked out of the hospital with my badge clipped securely back onto my scrubs, but I did not celebrate. There was no joy, no triumphant fist-pumping in the parking lot. I knew the psychology of a narcissist whose entire reality was crumbling into dust. If I pressed the legal and financial siege too hard and too fast, she would not just surrender, she would become feral. She might lash out with even more destructive, fabricated slander to anyone who would listen. Or worse, she might liquidate whatever small assets she had left and flee the state entirely, leaving my parents completely homeless and my father drowning in debt. I had to keep her contained. I had to force her into a corner where her only remaining option was to face me directly. I drove back to my apartment and sat on my worn sofa. The sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the living room floor. My phone screen lit up on the coffee table. The notification cut sharply through the silence. It was a text message from Bianca. It was not a plea for forgiveness or a white flag of surrender. It was the desperate, venomous thrashing of a trapped animal. The message was short and chilling. Meet me tonight, in person, just the two of us. Absolutely no lawyers. If you do not show up, I promise you will spend the rest of your life wishing you had never crossed me. I forwarded the ultimatum to Dana immediately. Her response was instantaneous and sharp. She absolutely forbade me from meeting my sister in private. A cornered predator is the most dangerous kind, she warned. But I knew Bianca. If I ignored her entirely, she would unleash whatever destructive contingency plan she had brewing in her frantic mind. I proposed a compromise. I chose a brightly lit, 24-hour diner on the commercial side of town. It was completely neutral territory. Dana agreed, but on one non-negotiable condition. When I walked into that diner at 9 o'clock that evening, a licensed private investigator retained by my lawyer's firm was already sitting 2 booths away, quietly eating a slice of cherry pie. Legally observing, and well within earshot, Bianca arrived 20 minutes late. For the first time in my life, I saw the physical toll of consequence on her face. Her usually flawless hair was tied back in a messy, greasy knot. The designer trench coat she wore was severely wrinkled, and her eyes were bloodshot. Yet, despite looking like a woman whose world was burning, she still carried her chin high. She slid into the vinyl booth across from me. She did not order anything. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the sticky table, and tried to project the familiar, commanding aura of the older sibling. "We need to handle this like a family," Bianca started, her voice a raspy whisper. "You have made your point. You threw your little tantrum, and you got my accounts frozen. But now you are hurting Mom and Dad. If you call off your attack dog lawyer and drop the civil suit tomorrow morning, I am willing to be reasonable. I will sign a family agreement. I will pay you back the surgery money, a small percentage every month for the next 5 years. We can keep the police and the courts out of our business." I stared at her. The sheer audacity was almost breathtaking. She had stolen from a dying man, mortgaged our parents' future, and tried to destroy my career. And she was offering me a 5-year installment plan on my own money. I did not blink. "No," I said simply. "There are no family agreements. You will face the legal consequences of every single dollar you took." The fragile illusion of her composure shattered instantly. Her face flushed a dark, angry red. "You are an idiot," she hissed, her voice rising sharply enough to turn the head of a waitress walking by. "You think you won because you got my trip canceled? I already sent a drafted dossier to the State Medical Licensing Board. I sent copies to 3 different local investigative bloggers. The drug theft story was just a warm-up. I have fabricated patient complaints, fake emails from doctors, and anonymous tips that will guarantee your license is revoked permanently. By Monday morning, you will never work in medicine again." I did not raise my voice. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a plain manila folder. I opened it and deliberately slid 3 single sheets of paper across the table, fanning them out so she could read the bold letterheads. The first was the formal termination of her contract from Aura Botanica. The second was the official legal notice from the payment processing company, detailing the permanent ban on her merchant account and the active fraud investigation. The third was the signed, stamped clearance letter from the hospital administration, fully exonerating me and explicitly noting the digital trail leading directly to her hardware. Bianca looked down at the papers. Her eyes darted frantically across the paragraphs. I watched the exact moment her lungs forgot how to pull in oxygen. She actually gasped. A short, ragged sound. The arrogant mask of the successful wellness mentor dissolved into absolute terror. She realized, in the span of 30 seconds, that every single door she could use to extract money or inflict leverage had been permanently welded shut. She started shaking. It was a violent, uncontrollable tremor that rattled the silverware on the table. She looked up at me, her eyes completely wild. "You cannot let them freeze everything," she choked out, her voice cracking. "If my credit defaults, they will come after you too. You think you are so safe. Nora, you are not." I frowned, a cold spike of adrenaline hitting my system. "What are you talking about?" "The short-term commercial loan," Bianca blurted out, her panic overriding her self-preservation. 2 months ago, I needed a bridge loan for my shell company to pay the public relations firm. My credit was already destroyed, but I had your social security number and your hospital pay stubs from when I helped you file your taxes last year. I used your identity as the primary guarantor. If my business accounts remain frozen and I miss the balloon payment next week, the creditors will garnish your hospital wages. A blinding wave of fury washed over me. Identity theft. She had literally chained me to her sinking ship. My instinct was to reach across the table and wrap my hands around her throat, but I remembered where I was. I remembered the man sitting 2 booths away. I forced every muscle in my body to relax. I kept my hands folded neatly on the table. I leaned in slightly, keeping my expression perfectly blank. "Let me make sure I understand you correctly," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the quiet diner. "You are admitting that you stole my social security number to fraudulently open a corporate line of credit in my name, without my knowledge or consent, to fund your business?" "Yes," Bianca cried, slamming her hand on the table, completely unaware of the security camera above the cash register capturing her erratic gestures, or the private investigator who had just stopped chewing his pie to document the confession. "Yes, I did it, and if you do not unfreeze my accounts, we both go bankrupt." I looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are pathetic." Bianca finally realized the gravity of what she had just screamed in a public place. Her eyes widened. She scrambled out of the booth, knocking her water glass over. She did not look back as she sprinted out the glass doors into the night. I stayed in the booth. The waitress came over to wipe up the spilled water. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Another text from Bianca flashed across my screen. The panic had fully consumed her. "Please do not file any more police papers about the loan. I am begging you. I will sign a confession for taking the surgery money if you just drop the identity theft charges. Please." She had just handed me her own execution warrant in writing. I forwarded the message directly to Dana. I drove home in absolute silence. At midnight, my phone rang. Dana was on the other end, her voice vibrating with professional triumph. "I just got off the phone with the judge's clerk," Dana said. "Given the new evidence of felony identity theft and the written attempt to bargain a confession, they expedited everything. The emergency injunction hearing and the preliminary proceedings for the combined civil and criminal fraud charges have been set. Get some sleep. Nora, tomorrow is the day every single knot gets untied." The fluorescent lights of the county courthouse were far less forgiving than the ones in my emergency room. The consolidated hearing was a masterclass in systematic dismantling. Dana Kessler did not yell or grandstand. She simply built a steel cage of undeniable facts around my sister. We presented 3 distinct, devastating pillars of evidence. First, the bank transaction logs proving the theft. Second, the fraudulent crowdfunding timeline. Third, the digital forensics of the retaliatory defamation aimed at my medical license. Bianca took the stand wearing a modest, muted dress, stripping away her usual designer armor. She attempted to cry on cue. She spun a frantic, convoluted narrative about how I had orchestrated a massive misunderstanding, trapping her in a web of banking errors simply because I was jealous of her online success. She played the naive, overwhelmed artist perfectly. Then, Dana pressed play on the bank lobby security footage. The entire courtroom watched Bianca proudly, arrogantly declare that the stolen surgery money was a business investment. Dana submitted the signed document into evidence. Bianca's manufactured tears stopped instantly, replaced by wide-eyed terror. Preston Hale took the stand next. He did not look at his wife once. Trading his loyalty for a reduced sentence, he walked the judge through the raw video files. He testified under oath that Bianca had forced my father to fake coughing fits for the camera 10 full days after she had already spent the initial charitable donations on a luxury villa deposit. A collective, disgusted silence fell over the gallery. She had not just stolen, she had directed a tragedy for profit. The director of personnel from Blackstone Harbor Medical Center presented the final nail in the coffin. She testified that the anonymous complaint accusing me of stealing narcotics was traced directly back to the Internet Protocol address of Bianca's primary laptop. The vocabulary in the false report matched her wellness brand perfectly. The judge did not even have to deliberate on my innocence. I was entirely cleared on the public record. My reputation surgically separated from her lies. My mother, Elena, sat 2 rows back in the gallery, looking incredibly small and aged. She was not painted as a criminal mastermind by the prosecution, but the law did not care about her maternal blind spots. because she had fraudulently opened a massive home equity line of credit to hide assets from the civil freeze and funnel money to Bianca. She was held financially liable. The mortgage lender was already moving forward with the foreclosure. Her unconditional defense of her golden child had cost her the only home she had ever owned. She wept silently, finally realizing she had sacrificed herself for a daughter who would never save her in return. Faced with the crushing reality of federal identity theft charges regarding the corporate loan and the overwhelming proof of wire fraud, Bianca had no choice but to accept a brutal plea agreement. She avoided a lengthy prison sentence, but her life as she knew it was over. She was ordered to pay full restitution to the donors, to my father, and to the hospital. She received 5 years of strict probation, a permanent felony record that would bar her from any legitimate corporate sponsorships forever, and a massive civil judgment that would garnish any future wages she managed to earn. Her wellness empire was officially dead, buried under a mountain of legal debt. When the gavel fell, the true victory was not the punishment of my abusers. It was the absolute, undeniable clarity of my own boundaries. A month later, the bank took possession of my parents' house. I did not swoop in to save it. I did not drain my newly recovered savings or take on extra night shifts to fix their mistakes. I simply helped my father secure a small, safe, assisted living apartment funded entirely by his pension and Social Security benefits. I made sure he had a medical transport schedule for his cardiac rehabilitation, but I handed the rest of the daily responsibility back to him and my mother. I loved him enough to make sure he survived, but I finally loved myself enough to stop carrying him. Blackstone Harbor Medical Center offered me a promotion to a senior supervisory role with a substantial pay increase, an apology for the suspension. I politely declined. The hallways of that hospital held too many ghosts of my exhaustion and desperation. Instead, I accepted a highly paid, long-term contract as a specialist in a trauma center 2,000 miles away across the country. I packed my life into a rented moving truck and drove away, watching the skyline of my past shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. I am standing on the balcony of my new apartment right now. The air here smells like pine trees and rain, completely different from the heavy salt and exhaust of my old city. My phone rests on the small iron patio table. The screen illuminates the dark. 2 text messages push through. One is a massive, rambling block of text from Elena, begging me to reconsider the family dynamic and help them financially. The other is from Bianca, a bitter, venomous paragraph about how I ruined her life. I do not read past the first few words. I do not feel anger. I do not feel the agonizing urge to fix their manufactured crises. I simply press the power button, plunging the screen into darkness. I take a deep, unrestricted breath of the cool night air. For the first time in 34 years, I finally understand that silence is not empty. It is a gift. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know where you are listening from in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and share this story so more people can hear it, so this story can be heard by even more people.